Good morning, welcome to this short video on beef. What is beef? Beef is the writer's agenda, their problem, the reason that they woke up and wrote the text. It's a phrase that Mrs. Yusufu has used over the years, and I think it perfectly encapsulates how to write a sort of strong introduction. In this video it's focusing on J.B. Priestley's and Inspector Calls, and you can see in front of you you've got the two questions from the 2019 summer series. The first thing, and the way I would decide which question I'm going to choose, would be which is the one which enables me to discuss the beef, the writer's problem, what Priestley's issue is, and the one that I feel that I've got the quotations and the knowledge of the text to do the most with. The two questions. How does Priestley present selfishness and its effects in an Inspector Calls? Or, how does Priestley present Sheila as a character who learns important lessons about herself and society? Both appear to be pretty kind questions. Ultimately it comes down to whether you want to focus on the one character, Sheila, or a number of characters perhaps. Selfishness. Personally, in this instance, I'm going to choose the character of Sheila. Because, in terms of the beef, she enables me to write fairly clearly about what Priestley's problem is. And all I'm going to do in this video is write the bullet points, and then your task would be to turn these bullet points into a strong introduction. So, let's move down. How does Priestley present Sheila as a character who learns important lessons? Well, what's the beef? What's the purpose of Sheila in the text? She does learn important lessons. Why? And I'm going to work in threes. My first point would be that Sheila embodies the younger generation who have the capacity to change, and they have the capacity to make the world a better place, and they have the potential to ultimately not do what their parents have done, which is cruel and unkind and perpetuates inequality. What does that mean? Keeps the circle of inequality circulating, keeps it going, turning round and round and round. What else does Sheila demonstrate in the text? Well, what is she in the text? She demonstrates the role of young women, I think, in society to facilitate change. And I'm just going to change the word change. A poor bit of English there, but I'm changing the word change because of the way that sounds. I've got the word change said too many times. In this instance, a kind of evolution of society, to facilitate evolution. There's an argument perhaps that maybe that could be revolution, but that's a slightly separate debate. Ultimately, quick change, gradual change, and I think it's up to you to decide which one of those words you think is most appropriate when it comes to you writing this. And the third thing, well, what else does Priestley use Sheila for? So, she can learn from her mistakes and change society. She represents the role of young women. And the third thing, Sheila becomes the voice of the inspector. So when the inspector has left the stage, she becomes his mouthpiece. And so that we have this scenario whereby Priestley has his beef. He uses the inspector as his mouthpiece to articulate that beef. And when the inspector leaves the stage after his fire and blood and anguish speech, then Sheila takes on the role of the inspector, asking the provocative, difficult questions of her family, and therefore sort of demonstrates the speed with which change can occur, at least in the younger generation. So maybe I'll point to this one here. And then your task becomes one of, well, I'm going to turn these ideas here, these 3 bullet points, into a first paragraph, because they articulate what J.B. Priestley's agenda is, why he wrote the character of Sheila. We must remember she's a construct, she's not real, and therefore she's being used as a vehicle to demonstrate some of Priestley's more significant ideas. And my first paragraph should therefore articulate these ideas, and then, as I then produce the work itself, I've got myself a sort of reasonably straightforward plan. My first paragraph is about the first bullet point. I want to give examples of how Sheila has changed over the course of the text. At the beginning of the text, she is immature and foolish. She calls Eric squiffy. Her mother says, "Really, Sheila, the things you girls pick up these days." Gerald gives her a ring and she just willingly accepts it. And at the end of the text, when, let's say, Gerald presents her with the ring once more, Sheila says, "It's too soon, I must think." That's a really lovely example of how Sheila's character has altered in the space of the time that the inspector has been there and the time that they're on the stage. I can talk about Sheila as a young woman, and how she facilitates evolution, how she alters, and the importance of young women. Why? She's demonstrative of the suffrage movement, how she compares and contrasts to Eva Smith. Ultimately, Sheila, because of her privilege, is able to live, and if she uses her privilege appropriately, then important lessons in society can actually be learned. Obviously, by contrast, Eva Smith, because of her lack of privilege, does not get that opportunity. So that's one of the important lessons that's learned, that young women can facilitate change, but we must use our privilege appropriately. And then the third thing, as I was alluding to earlier, well, in what way does Sheila become the voice of the inspector? At the beginning of the text, she's, as I said, the most inclined to take responsibility for her actions. A really good example of this is that when the inspector reveals that the young lady who Sheila got fired from the job at Millwoods is Eva Smith, she runs out of the room crying. That's in stark contrast to all the other characters, really, who refuse to accept any kind of responsibility when they are told of their role in the death of Eva Smith. So at the beginning of the text, she is already slightly different to the other characters, and then by the end of the text, she's the one asking the difficult questions of her parents. If I write all of that in the 45 minutes that I've got, I'm going to be showing off that I know the text really well, because I'll be covering the writer's beef, what the problem is, why they've written it. By discussing the beginning of the text and the end of the text, I'm already considering things to do with method. If I make reference to things like the suffrage movement, then I'm doing my context. I'm weaving it in there in a way that's fluent and reasonably seamless. And that's it. So your task, have a go at writing that essay using these bullet points and some of the ideas that I've discussed, and that will set you off on the right foot to writing a good essay. Good luck.